to hell. In other words, you may be able to preach, you may be able to lead a Bible study, you may be able to communicate the gospel really well, but if behind the scenes you're involved in sexual bondage, the enemy's laughing up his sleeve at you. We've done clinical studies in evangelical churches over the last 4 years, and we're able to come to some very concrete implications of the sexual bondage level that is in the church. In over 3,000 data points, we've discovered that 60 to 70% of men in an evangelical church are in sexual bondage. 20 to 30% of women are, and 50 to 58% of pastors are in sexual bondage. There's now, in the last 2 years, we've had clinical studies where we've discovered that there's such a thing as porn addiction versus sexual addiction. Porn bondage versus sexual bondage. Young men, 15 to 17 years old, now are having erectile dysfunction. Why? Because they're watching porn for so long they can't respond to a normal woman. What they will do is not masturbate continually. They'll watch porn as long as they can before they masturbate. So they'll watch porn 3 or 4 hours. Internet porn is uniquely focused on the male brain because it hits a number of things. The hunter brain, which we have as a male, it looks in for novelty, it's looking for adventure, and it's looking for an arousal. And you get those three in the internet. There's everything that you ever had your deepest, darkest, ugliest sexual fantasy about, it's on the internet. So you can constantly click, 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 and just keep a high going on until you finally, after 3 or 4 hours, masturbate. That changes your brain. You lose the capacity to respond to a woman. Gentlemen, there's no way we can have revival in the church's present condition. Well, God would have to repent to give us a revival. He's not going to do that. He's going to ask the church to deal with this, or we will become irrelevant.
There's no doubt about it that revival can only happen if we're dealing with this problem, because this problem is a secret sin. And because of that, it is able to go underground for a long, long time. But by the time it comes to the surface, usually it is a full-blown addiction that has to have real hardcore work to help a man to overcome it.
An addiction is something where you try to stop.
Yeah.
Or you've gone further than you thought you would. Or you're spending more time and money than you thought you would. Or you've been caught, or you've had consequences, and you keep going anyway. You've made promises to quit, and you can't fulfill those promises. To yourself, to God, to your family, to your wife. You probably have an addiction.
I don't want people to get this idea that you have to be a porn addict for porn to be a problem. Porn's a problem at any dose, and it doesn't need to be utilized at any dose, just like I wouldn't tell people, well, you know, as long as you're not addicted to cocaine, cocaine's fun. No, it's not.
Too often, guys in our private times think we're the only one that has an issue. We're the only one that has a problem. And what we find, though, is that this problem's prevalent.
And I personally do conferences all over the world. And I'll ask men, close your eyes. How many of you, you're not struggling occasionally? You're addicted. You've tried, you cried, you prayed, you can't win 5, 10, 30 years of this problem in your life. Raise your hand right now. There'll be 60, 70, sometimes 75% of men. Okay, I've been in places where they train Christian young men. More than 50% of men will raise their hand and say, I am struggling with this to the point where I can't win. That's how serious a problem it is in the Church of Jesus Christ, all across denominations.
When one of the largest studies ever done in history on the church, of 18 to 24-year-olds, 76% Christian men actively, regularly seek out pornography.
My guess is that every young person today is exposed to pornography either on their iPhone, on their iPad, on their computer at home. They almost cannot avoid it.
And it starts as early as puberty. They may have found a stash of pornography. They may have seen an image on TV or on the internet at 8, 9, and 10 years old. When puberty begins, that's when the addiction can begin. And by the time men are in their 20s and then in their 30s, it seems like it's sunk into their mind, it's sunk into their heart and into their beliefs.
What's happening today is that we're raising a generation of sex addicts in the church. Christian young men who are so exposed to pornography. And what's going to happen is that as this generation, they get married, they have children, and the spiral of their addiction gets tighter and tighter and tighter. It's going to really sweep through the church like a tsunami wave of destruction of the family. And the church is absolutely not prepared for it, because most of the pastors that I deal with are not even aware of the problem.
The church is in the sexual battle of its life. What the enemy has been about is trying to rob the church globally of its spiritual authority on earth. It's supposed to have authority to be the moral salt, to be the strength of a nation. And so what the enemy's after is our spiritual authority as men at home, as men in the church, as men in the community, as men as world leaders.
Mystery Babylon.
This was in 2006. Those statistics, this was made in 2014, I think.
And they just quoted
2006 statistics. Or statistics are
20
years old.
Yeah. Oh my God.
And it's not.
No, it's gotten much worse.
Yeah.
Wonders what happened to America.
We are Mystery
How did
Babylon.
we get from being a nation that liberated the world from the powers of evil to being a nation enslaved by sexual immorality? What was the turning point? Within 2 decades, we went from being a shining city on a hill to an exporter of darkness to the rest of the world. How did this happen? How did we slide into such moral decay so quickly? I wanted answers, so I met up with Dr. Judith Reisman, a world
She died
historian
like
in
5
the
years
destruction
ago.
of human sexuality. She's fought the pornography industry for decades and even won a lawsuit against Playboy.
I don't think pornography has always been such an epidemic cancer within our society like it is today.
No, not at all. We were, up to the end of the Second World War, a conservative Judeo-Christian nation. The turning point for all that was Dr. Alfred Kinsey.
Yep.
His book, Sexual Behavior in the Human Male, 1948. He was the father of the sexual revolution, and therefore the father of everything that has come from that. And certainly, one of the key things was pornography.
Dr. Alfred Kinsey ushered the destruction of our nation's moral code with his books, Sexual Behavior in the Human Male and Sexual Behavior in the Human Female, known as the Kinsey Reports. The world recognized him as the leading scientific expert on human sexuality. The reports claimed that humans were sexual from birth, and that what we deemed as immoral sexual behavior was actually normal, thus making it moral. What people to this day are not aware of were the methods he used to collect his data.
And I looked at the graphs that he provided, and I said, wait a minute, that's a 2-month-old baby. How does he know a 2-month-old baby did or did not have an orgasm? He also actually employed bona fide pedophiles to do what they did to children for his so-called data.
The research in Kinsey's books were partly based on the collection of data and confessions of a Nazi pedophile during World War II, Dr. Fritz von Balusek, who raped hundreds of children.
And now that became the foundation for the sex educational structure that fed itself into what we are teaching our children right now as we sit here and speak. And of course, it was the foundation of all the changes in our laws, the sodomy laws, the abortion laws, everything else. I mean, he's there. His handprints are on everything that deals with sexuality.
Essentially, what Kinsey did was he changed our belief about ourselves. This change of belief naturally changed our behavior. As a people, we would never be the same again. Ultimately, Kinsey's fraudulent data led to the legalization of pornography.
One of the virgins in college that read Kinsey and believed him was a guy named Hugh Hefner. He says, I will be, and I'm quoting him, Kinsey's pamphleteer. I will be Kinsey's pamphleteer. So from there, he began to advocate for changes in the law, and he created a magazine called Playboy, which then he said would reflect what Kinsey had found. Just as Darwin was the father of legitimizing evolution, Kinsey was the father of legitimizing the sexual revolution and all that's based upon that today.
Sure enough, Hefner was true to his word. Not only did he popularize pornography on a global scale, he also helped to legalize it.
I wanted a congressional investigation of Kinsey. At some point, we may, in fact, be able to get a public to be aware that they've been raped. The whole nation has been raped. That is what's happened to us.
So, whatever happened to Kinsey? Well, this glorified psychopath eventually died of a slow and painful disease called orchitis, a lethal infection of the testicles due to years of brutal masochistic masturbation and other vile sexual acts. How ironic.
That's wild.
The preacher of sexual liberation died from following his own message. Now, for any man who's trapped in
Take heed.
pornography, you need to realize you've been duped. You've been suckered, because ultimately, Kinsey's purpose was to remake man into his image, which really wasn't a pretty one.
Yeah, no thanks.
Why human sexuality? Because man was made in God's image. Satan wants to destroy the image of God in man. He wants us to not look like God in any shape, form, or fashion. He wants us to represent, in fact, his methods of selfishness. And so human sexuality becomes perverted and distorted, where we exploit each other.
And I believe God created our sexuality as something that brings great joy. And yet man, of course, in the fall has perverted that. And ever since, it's been a battle. Whether it is something of beauty or something that degrades people, something that brings joy or something that brings bondage. And that's been a battle since time began. God created beauty to attract us to Him. But the enemy uses the beauty, if you will, to try to attract us to things that take us away from God.
This is hell's master plan against men. This is what the enemy is using to destroy the culture of men. He's taking us down. And it's time to fight back.
See, as lower immorality leads to higher mortality. You see, all of sin promises to serve and to please, but only desires to dominate and destroy.
Maybe you're the guy sitting there and you never had an impure thought. Well, bless your heart. Because most guys have had an inappropriate thought. That happens. But this series can help you to get tools, whether you've never struggled, so that you help your brother.
Gentlemen, let's get one thing straight before we go any further. And that's the biblical definition of sexual purity. You've got Christian authors today that are saying masturbation's okay if you're single, you're married, whatever. But you have to remember something. Your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit. Therefore, any sexual activity outside of the marriage bed, doesn't matter if it's masturbation, oral sex, anal sex, fill in the blank, it's out of bounds, it's sin. Now, God is not uptight about our sexuality, but hell wants to take your desires and take them captive and turn them into a noose that you put around your soul. Well, how do guys get so tangled up? Well, let me tell you a stupid story from my youth when I was young and really stupid. I was in a Naval Training Command, and I decided it'd be a great idea to go cave diving. I'd never done cave diving before, so I was kind of excited about it. It's a dangerous environment if you get turned around and get lost in there. And the instructor checked us. Walked into the water, it's a natural springs. And we proceeded to the entrance of the cave, and it's just interesting because it's so dark and you don't know what's coming next. The instructor's guiding us along. Then he pointed to the ceiling, and it looked like there was a mirror in the ceiling, and actually what it was, all the escape air bubbles from the scuba divers were collected in the ceiling in kind of a dome-like structure. And he pointed up, and we went up above the ceiling into the air pocket, and it came up all the way to our chest, and there was plenty of air. So as we're swimming out of the cave, I'm thinking to myself, you know, I bet you I could swim free dive, and that means without a scuba tank, all the way back into the cave, find this air pocket, get a full breath of air, and come out. Now, if I can't find the air pocket, I got problems because I'm not going to get out. But I knew I could do it. It's called being young, stupid, and overloaded with testosterone. So we finished the dive, and everyone was having lunch, and I decided I would try that out. So I took my swim fins and mask and strapped on my dive knife and headed back to the entrance of the cave without a scuba tank, just holding my breath.
Where are you going?
I'm stopping for a quick swim.
Okay, hurry back. I have food.
pocket. I realized it's smaller than I remember it to be, but I didn't think much about it until I went up to try to get some air, and I realized it had gone from this level down to only about 2 inches. And I put my nose right up against the ceiling of the cave because the air had seeped into the rock. And I sucked the last bit of air that I could out of the air pocket, which immediately collapsed it up. And now I had not a full breath of air to make it all the way back up. I'm struggling to get out of the cave. I'm starting to panic. My chest is hurting. I'm running out of air, and I'm running out of time. As I go past the exit to the cave, there's a rope tied to a log that identifies the entrance to the cave that goes to a boy overhead. There was some excess rope attached to the log. As I went exploding past the log, somehow the rope wrapped around the dive knife that I had and created a noose. I thought, I'm dead, because you just don't have so much air to survive. I figured if I pulled real hard, I'd be able to break that noose and get to the surface. But the harder I pulled, the worse it got. And I went into full-blown panic. And I caught myself at the last minute. I would have died if I hadn't caught myself and said, pulling harder doesn't work. Down, pulled the knife out of my scabbard, got a hold of the rope and cut it so I could finally be free. And then I exploded to the surface before I passed out. How sweet it was to breathe air again. Puts a noose around our neck, and other people tell us to pull tighter on it, to try harder, to read the Bible more, and pray more. They've been told if you just pray more, if you love God more, if you tried harder, it will be healed. The problem is it's a noose around the neck. The harder they try, the worse it gets. So many men caught up and tangled up in sexual bondage because, like I had a rope around my leg, they have a noose around their soul. And the harder they pull against it, the worse it gets. That's why trying harder doesn't work. What do we mean by the noose of addictions? That noose is composed of 4 things. First of all, the root of that bondage. Dr. Patrick Carnes, who I was trained under, a world-renowned expert on sexual addiction and bondage, did an intensive study of over 1,000 sex addicts. And he discovered that, guess what? 70% of them came from rigid, disengaged homes. Well, what's a great definition of a rigid, disengaged home? A fundamental evangelical home, which has all kinds of rules and not relationship. That's not saying that every evangelical home's that way, but so many of them are. They have all kinds of rules because they're afraid their kids are not going to follow the faith. So they have rules when they're in grade school, rules when they're in high school. They go away to college and they drop off the cliff because they've never inculcated the faith down in their soul. They've not been able to do that. They don't really have a real in-depth relationship with Christ emotionally in their heart. And it can be subtle. Ever wonder why King David ran after Bathsheba, killed her husband? I mean, he was at the top of his game. Why would he act so stupid? It didn't make a bit of sense he did that. And if you understand the woundedness in his heart, it makes total sense. Well, you go all the way back to the beginning, back to the place where Samuel showed up at Jesse's home to anoint the next king of Israel. Jesse lined up all 7 of his sons. Remember that? And Samuel looked down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. None of them. He says, and then the prophet asked a stupid question. Do you have any other sons? Well, of course, a Hebrew father's going to have all of his sons there because one of them is going to be anointed the next king of Israel. But how many of you know prophets don't ask stupid questions? He said, do you have another son? And Jesse says, yes, we have, and they translate it in English very poorly. They said, yes, we have a younger son. Well, he actually said, yes, we have a Hakatan. I wish they had translated literally in the Hebrew. I have a Hakatan, a worthless one out in the field. David was considered worthless by his own father. He wasn't even there to possibly be the next king of Israel. Now, as soon as Samuel said, where's he at? He's out watching the sheep. Samuel said, bring him. Why? Because God had spoken to Samuel and said, King Saul is over. I found a man after my own heart, a little shepherd boy out in the fields, writing me love songs, blowing me kisses, dancing before me. He's going to be the next king of Israel. David's heart was right for God, but he had a deep wound in his soul that he worked with for years. That wound was working down in David's soul. And that's why when he got to the top of his game, it was never enough, because he had a very deep sense of shame within him, a sense of worthlessness. And that set him up for the process. Eventually, at the end of his life, he realized how much God loved him, and he finished well. But it's so hard to finish well when you have that wound and you don't process it. You can't finish well in life if you don't deal with the wounds of life. They're not processed. Wounds can come in many forms in our life. For example, there's big T, trauma, where we're suddenly impacted in life. Our parents divorced when we're young, violence in the home, Vietnam that I went through, fill in the blank. Our little T, which is like thousands of cuts. But a lot of guys end up in sexual bondage because they just get hooked by the internet. They don't have any trauma in their life. See, sexual addiction isn't about sex. It's about the way the person deals with life. For many men, unfortunately, because of the wounds in their life, end up learning how to fake Christianity.
You know, growing up in a Christian home, especially with parents that were leaders in the church, there were huge expectations on the children. My dad was a famous evangelist. My mom was a piano teacher and a piano player at the church. I literally grew up in the church. I learned how to fake Christianity. I learned how to be accepted among my friends. I learned what to say and what not to say, you know, because that was the environment I was in.
What is that?
It's Kent Ovington.
And Satan started really early in Eric Ovan's life trying to destroy it. I remember the first time I was exposed to pornography in 5th grade at a Christian school. I remember that being an addiction that didn't end for a long time, and I thought, well, I'll get over this pretty soon. This is something that just kind of goes, it passes by. You know, you don't want to talk to anybody about it. You're kind of embarrassed about it. So fear of the unknown, but at the same time wondering about the unknown, you just kind of keep going. And being raised in a Christian home, you know those aren't things you're supposed to look at. Those aren't things you're supposed to do. Sex was never a conversation in the home. It was more like the taboo subject that you don't want to talk about. I just kind of continued to suppress it and act like it didn't exist and act like everything was fine on the outside, but inside, man, Satan was getting his hooks in deep, thinking at 14, well, when I'm 16, you know, I'll kick this out. I remember thinking when I'm 18, that this won't be a part of my life anymore. And then I thought, well, as soon as I get married, that'll take care of it. And it doesn't. That's not the end. It just keeps taking you farther and farther. Sin will take you farther than you want to go, and it'll make you pay more than you want to pay. I still remember laying in bed at night, and I'd wait for my wife to go to sleep, and then I'd turn on the TV from right there in our bedroom, and I'd watch stuff that I shouldn't watch right there in our bed. And it wasn't until God allowed my wife to confront me that I got really honest. And I said, you know what? If I don't confess the truth all the way, Satan is going to keep a little bitty toehold in my life, and he's going to use that to dig down deeper, because he had done that over and over and over. I said, I'm done with this. I give up. Here is the whole truth. Here's everything. And that's the best thing to do, is to give up, to be humble. You see, honor comes after humility. You gotta humble yourself. But it really was the work of the Holy Spirit at 21 that actually did that in my life. At 21 years old, I began what I now call my God quest, my journey to know the one true God of the Bible, because I want the truth of who God is. And I know that when you see God for who He is, it literally changes your life. And on that journey, I continue talking about creation versus evolution, teaching people who the ultimate creator is. One of the biggest lies of Satan ever told is that nobody made us, the world made itself, and you're just a highly evolved piece of pond scum. If we're going to overcome the lies of the enemy, evolution is a big one. I get the privilege right now of leading a ministry that literally reaches millions of people. The journey that I've been on, God has taken me from slave to sin to slave of Christ. God has allowed me, through the power of His Holy Spirit, to conquer sin just like He did. And I get to live and serve Christ now. It's amazing. And that is not because Eric Hogan is so special. The only thing that can do that is the power of the Holy Spirit. And I pray that He does that in other people's lives as well.
So here's this thing in a man where he's attracted to this. He finds some sort of sense of solace in it. He finds some sense of satisfaction in sexuality. I've only got one place I can find safety. I've only got one place I can feel good, and it's in this sexual perversion, or it's in pornography. It's my little safe place.
They're looking for something to change the way they feel, make them feel better. And they have learned through previous experience that pornography gives them a jolt of dopamine and those other neurochemicals that have a transient euphoric effect and make them feel better in a brief moment of time, followed by increasing condemnation, guilt, and shame, which makes them feel worse and perpetuates the cycle.
And that can get into a man's heart to the place where it replaces God. It becomes a place of worship. It becomes an idol. And how do you know it's an idol? When you are in pain, you go to your idol. When you're in need, you go to your idol. When you're hurt, you go to your idol. When you want to celebrate, you go to your idol.
The lie becomes, this is just who I am. This cannot change. This will never go away. I might enjoy a week or a month here or there, but ultimately this is embedded in my soul and I can't get free of it. And as I watch the Conquer series and the guys that I walk in accountability with and the guys in our church walk through that, you could just see that flame of hope kind of rekindle and going, I not only believe what they're saying is true, but I think it could be true for me. And I think when that switch happens, that's when God unleashes power in the guy's life.
So guys, how are we going to apply all this information we've learned? How are we going to put it together so we can kick the devil in the teeth? Well, there's 5 things that you need to make a commitment to do this week. Number 1, join a Conquer group, an accountability group, and sign a covenant to contend together. You've got to have a group of other guys around you that help you to fulfill the commitments you made to purity. Number 2, go online and take the sexual addiction screening test. And remember, if you score more than 6 in the first 20 items, you're a sexual addict. You may not like that title, but that tells you what the enemy's done to your brain. It'll help you to define what the battlefield looks like. Number 3, clean the house of all porn. And take every electronic piece of equipment that you have and put an accountability software on it. iPhone, smartphone, computer, everything. Have an access accountability software on it. Just having filters and blocks, that's okay if you want to do that, but it's not going to solve the problem. Most young men can figure a way to get around the filter. You need to have a control system in your soul, not some electronic system, so that before you click on that, you know that your friends in the group are going to find out exactly where you went on the internet. You need that kind of accountability. I found so many guys say, I started to click it, but I went, wait a minute, my guys in the group are going to know exactly where I went, so I stopped. That's building internal controls. And also you need to be calling out to those 3 men, making 3 calls a week to guys in your accountability group. Begin to journal on your battles. You may not be a writing guy, but you go out and buy a journal, and at the end of the day, sit down and delineate all the urges you had, the triggers you had, the fantasies you had, so that you can start getting in touch with what's going on in your soul during the day. Not just living life from moment to moment, but living life on purpose. You'll see very clear sequences because your arousal template will set you up to act in very specific ways. Guys go through a triggering, ritual, acting out, triggering, ritual, acting out. Once you write it down, you start seeing the patterns. It may be helpful to have other guys in the group look at your journal after you start getting in a relationship where you can trust them, and they can pick up the patterns probably quicker than you could. It's so important that you take these 5 steps to to bring together all the truth that you've learned and an effective battle plan against the enemy. When you put all 5 of those things together, you're going to be able to have the strength to kick the enemy right square in the teeth.